We're less prepared now than we were then, I think. I understand there's only about 75,000 British soldiers at the moment. You're talking about dealing with millions of Chinese, millions of Russian. We've got no chance against them unless we arm ourselves to the teeth. We've got to do that.
The last surviving veteran of an SAS World War II unit, the Raiding Support Regiment, is my guest today for this special edition of World at War.
Just inside a tank on our way into Gaza. There is rubble and destruction as far as you can see.
They're digging in their positions, they're practicing. Point accuracy over target is what has transformed so much of this conflict.
This is World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and joining me today is Army veteran John Morris. John, thanks so much for joining us. You've had an extraordinary life. Could you just start by telling us, when and how you joined the British Army?
I actually joined the British Army because I was actually in the Territorial Army 2 years before the war. A friend of mine who I worked with was a TA to the 89th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment at Sittingbourne in Kent, and he inveigled me to join the TA with him, and I was called up.
So that was 1938?
1938.
How old were you then when you joined?
Nearly 17.
Okay, so you were 16, nearly 17, yes, and you joined the TA before the outbreak of World War II?
Before the outbreak of war.
And then what happened?
Well, we went to watch it for a training, anti-aircraft training, firing it. And I always remember watching it because I wasn't a drinker, but somebody inveigled me to drink black, very dark cider, and I got rather umbriaco with cider, but I never drank that again. And then we were there for a fortnight and came back. Very shortly afterwards, I was called up in 1939 at the age of 17. I always remember I was sitting in the garden in Kent, in Waterslade, and this big fat policeman came up. He said, "Your country needs you." And he told me I had to go report at my headquarters, the place called Darling Downs, I think it was, near Rochester. And I went there and reported September 9th, I think it was. So I became an anti-aircraft gunner with the 89th Heavy Aircraft Regiment.
So I mean, you answered the call. Your country.
I answered the call, yes.
You answered the call. And then you found yourself, if I'm right, fighting in the Battle of Britain.
As I was on the Battle of Britain from the beginning of the Battle of Britain until the end of the Battle of Britain, on mobile guns up and down the coastline from Dover to London.
You were crewing anti-aircraft weapons, shooting at the German Luftwaffe.
Well, our main job was really to break up the formation of bombers so the fighters could get at them. It's a pretty dangerous job in a way because they tried to get rid of us, of course, like they did. But we managed to survive that. And I always remember that when we joined the army, they were so short of equipment, they couldn't even give us a rifle for sentry duty. They gave us pickaxe handles.
Wow.
It was a long time before we got kitted out with British uniforms.
That really feels like a lesson in being prepared for war.
Well, it means
perhaps.
that the unfortunate part about it was while Hitler was arming, we were disarming.
And do you see any lessons in that for today?
Well, I don't trust people to say things, really. Because when Chamberlain came back waving his piece of paper saying, "Peace in our time," it didn't last very long. So in 1939, when the outbreak of war started, we weren't prepared for it. Anti-aircraft guns were very old-fashioned. They were wooden wheels, supposed to be mobile guns. We had to stop every 100 yards or so to grease the wheels, stop them burning. My job was a gun layer. I always remember just after the war started, while I was in Sittingbourne, we saw a Dornier coming over on reconnaissance.
What was a Dornier? Remind our viewers.
Pardon?
What was a Dornier? These were the flying boats?
One of the Dornier flying boats was doing reconnaissance. Being in the gun layer, I actually aimed my gun at it, hoping to hit it, which I didn't. And unfortunately, the kitchen chimney got in the way and that came down. Nobody had any breakfast that day.
So you accidentally shot down the chimney.
I wasn't very popular.
Do you, John, in terms of preparedness for war, do you see, when you look at the world around you today, do you feel like we might be in a situation that's similar?
I think it's worse. We're less prepared now than we were then, I think.
Wow.
I understand there's only about 75,000 British soldiers at the moment. You're talking about dealing with millions of Chinese, millions of Russian. We've got no chance against them unless we arm ourselves to the teeth. We've got to do that.
John, we'll come back to that. Let's carry on, though, with your experience of World War II, because it is amazing for us and for our viewers to have this opportunity to speak to you, to somebody who fought not only in the Battle of Britain, but then in the North Africa campaign and in Europe. I know you've had a number of brushes with death. It's not just extraordinary that you made it to 102, it's extraordinary in many ways that you made it through World War II. Can you tell us what happened after your time in the anti-aircraft battery?
Well, after the after the Battle of Britain, we moved to various parts of England where they're getting bombed, like Weston-super-Mare, on the Clyde, Bristol, Glasgow. Our last stop was Glasgow. We were there for some time at a place called Helensburgh. I found a nice girlfriend, Scottish girlfriend, so I was quite happy there for a while until we embarked on Operation Torch. I had to leave 89th Regiment and join the Essex Heavy Aircraft Regiment because my early regiment went overseas and I was too young to go. Operation Torch was the biggest landing ever in world history. There's actually 200 ships took part in Operation Torch on the North African landing. There was 3 battleships, 5 aircraft carriers, 7 cruisers, 38 destroyers, and the other 200 ships made up with troop carriers and cargo ships.
And this was, for any viewers who don't know, this was the Allied invasion of what was French North Africa.
November 1942.
And just how did it feel as a young man in your early 20s, I think, then?
18 and a half, I think.
18 and a half.
I wasn't allowed to go overseas until I was 18.
How did it feel as an 18-year-old?
Well, I was excited. I thought it was a big adventure. When you're young, you think that, you know. Don't realise that war is not glamorous.
And what happened? You sail
Well, when we landed at Beaune, we moved to Beaune from Algiers. By the way, when we tried to get into Algiers, of course, we were fired on by the French, Free French.
Right.
They actually fired on us and sunk 2 of our ships, and we sunk about 3 of theirs, I think.
Just in the chaos and the fog of war,
Yes.
friendly fire.
They were fighting with the Germans against us.
Oh, they were fighting with the Germans?
Yeah.
So this wasn't friendly fire, this was deliberate hostile fire from the French?
Then we moved us down to Beaune, which is farther down the coastline, more towards Tunisia.
And am I right in thinking you'd sailed to North Africa on one vessel, you weren't still an anti-aircraft unit, but your guns had come
Separately, yes.
And what happened to them?
Well, the ship carrying our guns was torpedoed, and we lost a few men, and we lost all our equipment. So when we landed at Beaune, we was an anti-aircraft regiment with no guns.
So what did you do?
Well, when we landed there, I know we slept the first night at a tobacco factory, sleeping on bales of tobacco. And then they moved us into a place called, I think, Clare, which is close to the port of Beaune. And because we had no guns, they decided, because I was a brain gunner, they'd stick me on top of a roof, flat top roof, with twin brins to fire at any low-flying German aircrafts like Stukas if they came down to bomb us.
And what was it like? I mean, you did come under attack from these Stuka type
Well, we
bombs.
got machine guns and everything like that, but I'm lucky we both managed to escape being injured.
And what was it? I think you told me before that the sound of those planes, terrifying. You can hear them coming
in. The
in.
Stukas coming down was scary. They used to make a terrible noise when they came down.
And John, how did you manage to get from that role to joining the raiding support regiment? Because
well, I was taken sick with hepatitis. A lot of people were getting it because the water was being poisoned before the Germans, I think, left. But when I was discharged, I was waiting to be returned to my unit, and the RSR just started.
That's the raiding support regiment.
Started getting people together to form the regiment. I was one of the first ones to join the RSR.
So what happened? Did somebody come through the convalescent camp, or?
Well, they came there and they asked for recruits. When you're young, you volunteer for everything.
Did you know what you were getting yourself in
Well,
for?
I knew it was going to be dangerous. I knew it was operating behind the enemy lines most of the time. And I thought, well, this is going to be a bit of an adventure. So I joined.
And what happened? I mean, essentially, for viewers who don't know, the SAS had been formed about
1941. The SAS was formed.
By David Sterling
They was
in North
operating in
Africa.
the desert. We were operating in North Africa. We were in the American First Army, actually.
And what was the role of the Raiding Support Regiment?
Heavy support for special operations, that like the LRDG or the SBS or the SAS or Pops's Army, or mostly our main job was helping the partisans.
Right, and we'll come to that because that's where you ended up in Yugoslavia. So, but you have to train, do you? Once you've joined the RSR, do they put you through any training?
Very heavy training, yes. Not as hard as they get these days, I don't think, but it was pretty tough. 6 weeks of very heavy training. I remember doing my first parachute jump, and I used to be scared of heights, so I wasn't very happy doing a parachute jump. It's only from about 600 feet, 800 feet, I think, that's all.
Wow.
And it's an operational jump, and I think I was pushed out. It was actually through the bomb doors of the Wellington.
Wow.
5 in a stick. I think I was pushed out. I'm sure I didn't go voluntary.
But you got your wings, you passed your course.
Passed my course.
And how soon until you were thrust into combat operations again?
Not long after that. It was in July, and in September, it was Operation Solerno, I think. Salerno landing in Italy.
What was that like?
Well, it's pretty hairy. I mean, we were what they call D-Day Dodgers, as you're probably aware, but we'd already done 3 D-Days.
So D-Day Dodgers was a phrase, a term coined in England.
That was supposed to have been coined by Lady Astor, called us 3-Day Dodgers, because we weren't on the Western Front. But remember that 90% of the troops in Italy were ex-8th Army. They'd been fighting for 2.5 years in the desert already. We'd been fighting for over a year in North Africa.
So you'd done your D-Days, you'd taken part in Operation Torch. Now
Yeah.
you were taking part in your second landing in Salerno.
Salerno.
And how long did that last? How long was your involvement in the Salerno campaign?
Well, it lasted some time, but the Germans actually evacuated, kicked them out, and they moved up to Monte Cassino, where I think there was many casualties. I actually went 2 years ago to Monte Cassino, to the cemetery there. There was 8,000 British and colonial troops killed, 3,000 Poles, and 22,000 Germans were killed at Monte Cassino, all in 3 months. Total number of casualties in Italy actually was 75,000 British and colonial troops killed.
John, you were lucky in many ways because you, I think, were diverted before Monte Cassino. Is that
Yes.
correct? And tell me, so where did your war take you next?
After we moved out of, got the Germans out of Naples area, they sent me on a refresher course near Naples, a radio course to learn about a new radio set and also new code words, codes and everything. And that was a 6 weeks course where I improved my Morse.
So you do this training, this radio operator training, refreshing your Morse.
Yes.
And is this before you start training the partisans?
No, when we'd done our training in Morse, they moved us down to the Baltic coast of Italy, a place called Mola de Bari, in a convent, ex-convent. And that was their headquarters. I got ill again, I can't remember what it was. I think it was sandfly fever or something. And I was evacuated to a hospital. And when I was discharged from hospital, they put me in a convalescent camp on the side of Vesuvius. That was March the 7th, 1944. Unfortunately, it erupted while I was on there. And I managed to escape from that one as well.
So not only are you surviving the risks
So
from the Germans and the Italians.
don't go on a volcano island where I am, because it's pretty dangerous, I can tell you.
And after this near escape, this brush with death,
Then we moved back to Mola. I was sent back to regiment, and our first main operation was with Land Forces Adriatic. Our first operation was Yugoslavia. We landed at Dubrovnik, and our job then was to help the partisans kick out the Germans.
and the partisans, for viewers, the partisans were really like the Yugoslav resistance, a
They
bit
were
like
the
the French
communists,
resistance. And they were fighting.
They were Tito's
They were
crowd.
Tito's forces.
But there's also, Croatia had another force there called the Ustashi. They were the fascist, they were German, fighting with the Germans. And they were worse than the German SS, more cruel. Because I remember going we went to a hospital while we was attacking the Ustashi, and they killed all the patients and the nurses and all the children in the hospital. It was terrible.
It does sound terrible. And were you fighting directly against the Ustashi or against the...
Well, we're fighting with the partisans against the Ustashi.
And what was your role? Tell us about what your
I was just radio operator.
Just a radio operator.
And machine gunner.
And a machine gunner. And I know that at some point you were specifically training radio operators.
Yes, that was up in Montenegro. We moved up from Dubrovnik to Montenegro, and my job was... That was Tito's headquarters, by the way. And I had a big wooden cabin. We all slept in a big cabin, all the partisan girls and us and everything. And
partisan girls?
My job was training the partisan girls to use a new radio set and new codes. I remember I had the beautiful girls laying by the side of me sleeping. Unfortunately, she went to bed with hand grenades around her waist. So I didn't take any chances. I might pull a pin out by mistake.
John, another potential brush with death avoided. I remember you've also told me, so you've survived at this point an eruption on a volcano, you've survived the Salerno landings, the Operation Torch. You were also a prisoner of war briefly. Can you tell me about that?
That was in Albania. But before then, I think an amusing story again to make you smile was when the LRDG chap who I got very friendly with, Blondie Smith, said...
LRDG, that's the long-range desert group, which was the unit which had worked very, very closely with the SAS in
we were
North
all
Africa.
working together as a unit. There was long-range desert group, there's SAS, there was Special Boat Service, I think was there, and there was us.
Okay.
And I remember his name. I don't remember many names. My memory lapsed a bit because of the malaria, buggered up my memory. But he said to me one day, he said,
John,
would you come?
Blondie Smith,
He said, would you come to Dubrovnik, pick up the mail? Well, you could see Dubrovnik because it's right down in the hills.
Where were you?
Up in Montenegro.
Up in Montenegro.
A place called Nikšić. I said, I'll have to ask my governor because we're a different regiment. He said, yeah, you can go, he said. Unfortunately, driving down, we drank of two rakis. We didn't realise how strong they were. So we picked up the mail. We had no idea how to get back because there were no road signs anywhere. We didn't have any maps or anything. And I was riding shotgun, if you remember, and my driver was the LRTG bloke. Anyway, we made a mistake and started driving through a German-held village. This was Christmas Eve, 1940. And he said, John, don't kill anybody, it's Christmas Eve. He says, fire over their heads. So I had twin Vickers on the Jeep. So I fired over their heads. I was out there drinking schnapps or whatever they're doing. They all scarpered. We managed to get back to our lines. But
wow.
I didn't get any mail myself. I got the mail back safely. I didn't get any letters myself. So
you got the mail back. You must have been pretty popular with the other soldiers to getting their Christmas cards to them.
I got their mail back.
It does seem that a lot of your recollections, John, about the war, you remember the moments of levity, the moments of humour in between what was clearly a horrific campaign.
Well, I think you've got to keep your sense of humour at all times. It's the only thing at sometimes keep you alive, if you understand what I mean.
I do understand. I think I understand what you mean. You were fighting, you were on the front lines and behind the front lines.
Yeah, we were behind enemy lines.
Tell me about the time you were captured.
This was in Albania, actually. We landed at a place called Sarandi in Albania, and the Sarandi was about, I suppose, over a small mountain, probably 10 miles away. They gave me this bloody mule. I said, take it up with the radio set with your colleague, who's a sergeant. He said, and go up on the mountain and send fire orders back to the beach so we can mortar the prisoner of war camp, this transit camp where the Germans were coming up trying to get to the Russian front.
So you'd landed, you were creating a forward observation post so that you could observe enemy positions and call in details to the guns behind you so they could
going up to the top of this hill, big like a small mountain, the German spotters had started lobbing 88mm shells over at us coming up the mountain. So we tried to get the mule out of the way. He wouldn't move, wouldn't budge. So we got him measured time to a tree. I said, we'll come back for him tomorrow morning, or the sergeant said that to me. He said, we'll have to carry the radio and the batteries up ourselves. So we did that, got to the top, set up our camp. and started sending fire orders back. In the morning, he said, go down and bring the mule back. Well, I went down and back to get the mule, and my mule had completely disappeared. Never saw it again. So anyway, we carried on for a little while. Hadn't been there very long. And the Italians must have spotted us or something. And they sent us a fighting patrol and we managed to destroy our equipment and everything. And they took us in prisoner, locked us, the sergeant and myself, in this little, I think it's a guardhouse on the front of the transit camp.
So to be clear, they took you down the other side of the mountain. 8-man patrol found you and your sergeant, two of you outnumbered, took you down to the transit camp.
Because there was about 10 Italians, I think. That was too much for us. They were very good fighters, but they had 10 rifles, so we thought it was best to give ourselves up. Anyway, when we got there, we also knew that we'd heard that the British Air Force, was called the Baltic Air Force, was going to send out some blending bombers to drop leaflets on the camp in the morning, telling them to surrender. They were surrounded. The sergeant said to me, if you get questioned, just tell them they're going to be bombed in the morning.
So you did? You told them they were going to be bombed?
Well, I did, and he did as well. So when I didn't know at the time that my sergeant had a little Beretti on the bottom of his water bottle.
This is a type of pistol?
Yeah, a little ladies' smaller Beretti automatic. Anyway, when the air range sounded and everybody went under cover, except this poor guy that was outside, he managed to get his cigarette lighter out and unsoldered the bottom of the water bottle, took the Beretti up, called the guard over, stuck him up and said, unlock the door, which he did because he didn't want to get killed. So we didn't want to kill him anyway, so we tied him up, gagged him, and we scarpered, managed to get back to our lines.
So 24 hours in captivity, you use a leaflet drop as cover to escape, and you managed to hike back over that mountain.
They thought they were going to be bombed, but they weren't. They got dropped leaflets saying they were surrounded.
Quite an extraordinary war.
It was quite exciting, actually. Then I unfortunately got malaria and I was evacuated to Greece, to Italy, a place called Taranto, hospital there, and I had a very severe attack of malaria. I always said to people when they said, how did you get malaria in Albania in the winter? I said, but the Lord in his wisdom sent a mosquito all the way to Albania to give me malaria so I wouldn't have to go to Greece.
Because, I mean, you've told me this before, John, you've had such a long life and so many brushes with death that you have said you felt that someone has been looking over you.
Well, I'm sure God is looking after me. I've had so many escapes. And I know that I had more than 9 lives, but at least I know I had 9. And I think it wasn't all accidental.
John, just tell us briefly about this other brush with death, which was tragic because your mother-in-law.
Yes,
John, sorry, just tell us briefly about your brush with death.
We was on this cruise on the Laconia, the Greek ship. It had been fitted out in Southampton, supposed to be fit for cruising, which it never was. And we was about going to the Canary Islands. It was Christmas. Unfortunately, at 11 o'clock at night, we were actually in the ballroom because my wife was pregnant, but we also had a 3-year-old son, and he was in a stateroom being looked after by a girl who used to walk up and down the corridor looking after all the children. Unfortunately, while we were having a bit of fun, the ship caught on fire. I tried to get back to the cabin to rescue my son. And unfortunately, I couldn't get to the cabin because I'd only been there once, in the stateroom. And I was very aware. I tried to get through the smoke, but the cabins were full of smoke. I had no operators. And a German sailor came over. There's only a few German sailors on board, most were Greek. And he said, "What's wrong, sir?" I said, "My son's in," I gave the name of the stateroom, "and I don't know how to get to him." He said, "I'll go and get him for you," he said. And he managed to rescue my son and bring him back to me. And I thought, well, 1 minute I said, I'm fighting the Germans. The next minute, the Germans saving my son. It was amazing. The ship got worse, fire got worse, and they said evacuate boats. So I tried to get everybody on the same lifeboat. Unfortunately.
And everybody was your pregnant wife, your son,
and
your mother-in-law.
My wife was pregnant, my mother-in-law, and her grandmother. And unfortunately, I got the grandmother, my wife, and my son on one boat. And I tried to get my mother-in-law on, and the chap crushed by me, pushed my mother-in-law out the way and jumped on the boat.
Another passenger.
A passenger. So I said, look, get off that bloody boat, let my mother-in-law in. I said, well, the family's there. He said, no, I'm staying. I said, have you heard of women and children first? Anyway, I wasn't too worried about that. I thought I'd get on another boat, so I put on another boat. Unfortunately, it had been very badly maintained, this boat. And when it was being lowered into sea, the actual davit snapped and tipped everybody in the water. I didn't know that. I thought she was safe. But when I got to Casablanca...
But before you got to Casablanca, you spent a long time in the water.
I was 6 hours in the water without a life jacket, and I managed to swim onto a piece of driftwood. I think it was probably a boat life raft or something. Anyway, I pulled myself on board. I had no life jacket, so I was very happy to get on there. And then I managed to pull on another chap on board who was floundering in the water. So anyway, I got picked up after 6 hours in the water. I was actually knackered by then and had a job being pulled onto the ship. They lowered a rope down, tied it round me and pulled me up. And when I got on the ship, there was this bloody man who crashed onto the lifeboat in front of me. So I said to him, I said, you bastard, excuse my language, I said, if I was strong enough, I'd give you a damn good hiding. Anyway, I never saw him again. And I was actually taken to Casablanca, where I learnt then that my mother-in-law was missing. And after a few days, they flew me to England, and I heard that my mother-in-law was dead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
She was a lovely lady too.
John, it is extraordinary, and there's a lot that we haven't got time for. I know that after the war you managed a band. I know that you took your last job, I think, aged 85, is that correct?
85. I had a restaurant in Mallorca.
You had a restaurant in Mallorca?
And that was, unfortunately, a failure because the chap who owned the property had to go in liquidation. And though I was running a very successful restaurant, 5-star restaurant, Spanish police came and closed us down and took all my stock and kicked us out.
And John, you're now a Chelsea pensioner living at the Royal Hospital in Chelsea. There's a couple of things I wanted to ask you, though, before we run out of time. I know that very late in life you discovered your family was a little bit bigger than you'd realised.
When I was in Bristol, no, in Australia.
In Australia.
Pardon, I had a phone call one day saying, I think you're my dad.
And how old were you? Just remind us how old.
I was 97.
You were 97.
And I said, how do you mean? She says, well, your daughter, Anne, who did a DNA search, I came up as one of your family. He said, I think you're my father. So I said, oh dear. I said, I'm happy about that. I said, I'm wondering what happened to you. I'm very pleased to hear that. Thank God. And I really was. Anyway, she said, you've not only got me, she said, you've got 3 grandsons as well. And one of them happened to be in the 101st Screaming Eagles Army. He's a colonel. And when I had my 100th birthday, they came over to my birthday and I met them for the first time. So that was amazing, wasn't it?
And that's why you're wearing the Screaming Eagle
badge on your lapel. That's why I'm wearing the Screaming badge, yeah.
Next to the SAS. Next to the SAS badge. John, it is extraordinary. And before we finish, I just wondered if you could reflect slightly on some of the lessons that you've learned in your life. You've said already that you think, as you look at the country today, that we're not prepared for war. As you look at the world more broadly, are you concerned by the state of global affairs?
I'm very worried. I'm very worried about what China's going to do. They're copying the Japs as far as Australia's concerned, surrounding Australia with enemies. They have they own the port in 99 years in the port in Darwin. They got an aerodrome in Norfolk Island, I believe, which they've shut to the public. They're trying to get another port or another aerodrome in Papua New Guinea. I said they're trying to surround Australia with enemies. I said I'm very worried about that.
What would you, if you could sit down with Keir Starmer. Would you have any advice?
Well, I don't know very much about UK politics. The first thing the new Prime Minister's got to do is arm our country, getting ready for the possibility of a Third World War. At the moment, we're definitely underarmed. I believe there's only 75,000 troops, which is ridiculous for a country of our size.
John, and if you were to sit down with somebody at the start of their career, because I know you've done talks in schools, but if you were to, when you do sit down with those school children, and such an amazing opportunity for them to connect with you, or a young person starting out in their life, in their professional life, you've already talked about the importance of humour. Is there any other advice you might give somebody?
Well, children.
Children, young people?
Well, I think the most important advice to give to children, especially the teenage children, the hardest thing for a teenager to say is no. When children say, how do you live so long as 102? I said, because I said no. I said I never drank very much after I found out it's bad for you. I gave up smoking. I said, the hardest thing for a teenager to say no. I said, when I was young, there's hardly not only drugs we knew about was the opium in the Chinese area of London. I said, we never heard of cannabis, never heard of drugs at all. I said, in fact, it's only in the Second World War when the Americans brought drugs over to Australia, to England, that people had drugs. Nobody ever thought of drugs before. I said, the reason I lived till I'm 102 because I never took drugs. I knew when to say no. You don't need drugs, I said. You don't need drugs to enjoy yourself.
And yet you've also told me that if something scares you, how do you respond? How should they respond to fear?
In my young life, I was scared of the dark. I'll give you one example anyway, just the one example. I used to be frightened of the dark. I used to go to choir practice down in the village, which was about a 3-mile walk to where I lived, up in Robin Hood Lane. And I used to wait for a bus to have somebody to walk up the dark road with me up the hill to my place. And I used to wait for a bus to come in. There's only 1 or 2 buses a day, but there's always one just after the choir practice, and I used to wait. So one day I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. There's a shortcut through a wood. So one day I decided I'd go through that wood, even though I was scared stiff. And I took the shortcut back through the woods to my place, and I never was scared of the dark again.
So your message
is, if you're scared of something, do it, or near possible do it. I said you never be scared again.
John, you have had an extraordinary life, and thank you, aged 102.
One thing I'd like to say, I'd like to thank the Sun newspaper. I'd like to thank Pilgrim Bandits, who help a lot of disabled soldiers. They got me to Australia.
They got you to the UK.
And it's a very great expense themselves, and I thank them for that.
John, that's really kind of you. Just to explain that to people who are watching, you'd emigrated to Australia many decades ago and were looking for an opportunity to come back, and it was the Pilgrim Bandits
and the Sun newspaper got me
and
back.
the SAS Association. They deserve their credit as well, all working together to bring you back in order for you to take up your place.
I'm now in the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, for ex-soldiers, and they're a fantastic place, and they looked after me very, very well.
Well, John, I know from the Sun's point of view, it was we were just delighted to be able to be a small part of that journey, helping you.
Thank you.
It's the least we could do
Sun.
after your extraordinary service for this country. And thank you today for coming on board, for coming to join us here at World at War. For those of us watching on YouTube, thank you for joining me at World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey. And if you are watching this at home and you have any questions for us, if you have any questions for John, please write them in the comments below, and I will do my best to make sure that either I or John can answer them, find a way of answering them, either next week in our show or in the comments below this broadcast.